Hello, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to join us today. Welcome to the second edition of the webinar being arranged through a strong East African collaboration between Barefoot Law, based in Uganda, and Strathmore University, based in Kenya. For those of you who are joining us for the second time, welcome back. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, you are very welcome. We're very happy to have you all with us. My name is Rhoda Namboze. I am the Director of Development at Barefoot Law and a lawyer by profession. I'm going to give you a quick brief about the webinar series, how it came about, and a quick run through of the program. So this, as I mentioned, is the second edition of a webinar series that's been put together by Barefoot Law and Strathmore University for the benefit of legal professionals, students, justice defenders, justice actors, and really the world at large, with the intention of kind of fostering an environment and a culture through which, the different audiences present can learn and thrive in their different respective professions. As we, brave the storm that is COVID-19. This webinar is meant to provide an avenue for exchange of ideas, of practice that can, practices that can positively affect and shape the access to justice space, and to help us become better, well-rounded legal professionals and justice actors and defenders, so that we can, in turn, better serve the people who rely on our services. So today we are honored to have with us, we have Emma Wabuke, who will be joining us shortly, of Strathmore University. And then we also have Gerald Abila of Barefoot Law. We're also joined by Erin McGinley, who is an off-counsel at the Jones Day Law Firm. And of course, our honored guest speaker, retired Judge Anne Claire Williams. So I'm going to ask Gerald to quickly introduce himself, introduce the work that Barefoot Law does, and then I will ask him to then do the honors of introducing Erin McGinley, who will then take us through how the session is going to go, and she'll also introduce us to Judge Anne Williams. So, Gerald?
Thank you, Rhoda. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us on this webinar, the second in our series between Barefoot Law and Strathmore Law School. The first, which took place last month, was involved. The first that took place last month was a retired judge, the Chief Judge of Kenya, Willie Motunga, and it was about empathy. Today, we are privileged to host Judge Anne Claire Williams, who will be talking about mediation and arbitration during and after COVID. As you're all aware, the world is going through strange times. What started off as a health crisis is quickly turning into an economic crisis, and it will turn into a rule of law crisis. Mediation and arbitration will have a huge role to play, and that's the theme of this discussion. Briefly, Barefoot Law uses innovation and technology to guide people towards resolving the justice needs that they face. But technology alone is an enabler. It's an enabler for mediation and arbitration. It's an enabler for us as human beings to bring out the empathy in the work that we do. And today's session is special because of the wave or the increase in cases that we're likely to face. We need to think outside the box, and we need to embrace alternative ways of dispute resolution. We hope you enjoyed the session. Thank you for taking time off. I would like then to introduce Erin to take on from here. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Gerald, and greetings to everyone from Chicago. My name is Erin McGinley, and I'm an attorney and adjunct professor here in the US. I have had the great fortune of working with our honored guest, Judge Anne Williams, for over 15 years now. It's been fascinating legal work, and she's also taken me many times to Africa to help in training judges, lawyers, other attorneys. With her, I've been to Kenya over 10 times, and these masks that are hanging behind me here in my home are actually from one of my first trips to Kenya. I've been fortunate to go to Nigeria, Tanzania, Rwanda, Liberia, Ghana, and Uganda has always been on my list. And so I'm hoping there is a vaccine soon for many reasons, including selfishly, so that I can visit Gerald and Rhoda and many others in Uganda. Well, I'm very honored to be with all of you today and to be interviewing my mentor, my role model, and just an incredible person, Judge Ann Claire Williams. Welcome, Judge Williams.
Oh, thank you, Erin. Thank you so much for that kind introduction. Thank you, Gerald and Rhoda and Barefoot Law and Strathmore for having me. I'm a big fan of Barefoot Law and Strathmore. We've had many collaborations together, and I'm honored to be the second person in this series following after my dear, distinguished friend, Dr. Willie Mutunga, the former Chief Justice of Kenya. So greetings to everyone in our listening audience, and thank you for being a part of this discussion.
Yes, now some of you may be wondering, why are we hearing today from a judge all the way in Chicago, halfway across the world? And so to partially answer that, I thought I'd tell you a little bit about her incredible story. If we could have the first slide, Rhoda. Judge Williams was appointed by President Ronald Reagan to the United States District Court in 1985. You could actually advance it one more slide. There we go. It was a presidential appointment to the U.S. trial court. And in a moment here, you'll see her at her swearing in with her incredible family. And in the U.S., you need to fill out a lot of paperwork before you can be nominated. And where were you, Judge Williams, when you filled out that paperwork for the judicial nomination?
Well, it was very time sensitive. And I was actually in the maternity ward awaiting the birth of my second child, Claire. I had to get the paperwork in 2 or 3 days. So I had to do what I had to do. So my husband and I were in the waiting, and he was asking me questions like, when did you graduate from law school? When, where did you go to law school? He knew these things, but he was filling out the form, and a nurse came in and said, "Oh, ma'am, you don't have to worry, dear. You've registered already." And I said, "Oh, no, it's something else. It's something else." And so we continued until the contractions got too bad. I had Claire, and then after a couple of days, I went right back to filling out the paperwork.
And there you can see about 9 months later, there's Claire at Judge Williams swearing in the federal courthouse in Chicago. So I love that story. We also see on the right picture there, Judge, your incredible parents that I was fortunate to know, Dorothy and Joshua Williams. And maybe you could talk a little bit about yourself growing up. Did you know any judges or lawyers growing up? And what was your inspiration?
Well, I didn't know a lawyer or a judge. I didn't meet a lawyer or a judge till I went to law school. Actually, I was a public school teacher. I was teaching in the inner city schools of Detroit. I knew nothing about law. There was one TV show that I used to watch, Perry Mason, and it was a very famous show, and he won every case. I knew about him. And of course, I knew about the iconic Thurgood Marshall, who ultimately became the first Black justice of our U.S. Supreme Court. I knew the work he was doing in the civil rights area, but I never knew a lawyer. I imagine many of you listening that are legal professionals, at least you may be the first ones that have graduated from college, then the first ones to go to law school. That was certainly my experience. So it was a difficult road for me because there was really no one to tell me what that experience would be like. But I often and still do think of my parents and the challenges they faced, and they've inspired me.
Thank you. We can have the next slide. In 1999, President Bill Clinton elevated Judge Williams to the U.S. Court of Appeals. And President Clinton was a Democratic president in our country. President Reagan, who appointed Judge Williams to the trial court, was a Republican. As you may know, our country is unfortunately very fractured right now. And so the fact that she was appointed to one court by a Republican president the other by a Democratic, is very unusual in the US, and I think a huge testament to Judge Williams. So here she is at her swearing in for the US Court of Appeals. And what should you like better, Judge, being a trial court judge or an appellate judge?
It's a very difficult question, Erin, because I love the trial court because basically I love people and I loved being the person that the parties look to for justice. And because it was an opportunity for me to do equal justice to the poor and the rich, it didn't matter what color, what religion, what background a person had. It was an awesome responsibility in the trial court because in our system, we have juries. So some of the cases are resolved by juries, but many of the cases, just like on the continent where there are very few jury trials, the judge has to make the decision. So I enjoyed the interaction with lawyers and I enjoyed the trials very much. The Court of Appeals I enjoyed for different reasons because our Court of Appeals was made up of 3 states, Illinois, Indiana, and Wisconsin. 11 judges sat on the Court of Appeals, and the judges came from the 3 different states. So once a case had been decided in the trial court where I used to be, it would come up to the Court of Appeals and there would be a legal issue that would be raised in the case. Like if it was a criminal case, did the evidence that was admitted, was it proper or improper? We would then look at that, look at the law, look at the case law in the United States, look at the Supreme Court and decide whether or not it was a violation of some constitutional right or some other right. So there in the Court of Appeals, we affected the law in all 3 states. And so in that sense, it had a bigger impact. Certainly in the trial court for the parties before me, any decision I made had a huge impact on their lives. But what I enjoyed about the Court of Appeals is when I could get other judges to agree with my point of view. I mentioned, Erin, we talked about my parents, and one of the things I would like to say and why they were so inspiring for me, because this was not an easy journey. I was the 3rd African-American woman to serve on any court of appeals in the United States. And when I went to the district court, I was the 1st African-American woman to serve on that court and to serve in our entire 7th Circuit. But I always went back to my parents who grew up in the segregated South in South Carolina. Both of them worked their way through college. They went to historically Black colleges. When they moved to Detroit and they looked for work, even though my mother had a degree in education, because Blacks were not being hired in the school system for full-time positions, she had to work at a training school for 12 years. And then finally it opened up. She became a substitute teacher and she ultimately became a teacher. My dad had a degree in psychology and political science. He couldn't find a job either, so he ended up driving a bus. He drove that bus for 20 years. And then when he wanted to get a promotion, he was denied that promotion by his white boss. And he decided he would quit. He had enough money in his pension fund, and he would go back to school to become a teacher. As fate would have it, he and I were in classes together. And that was when it hit me that Daddy had a college degree and he was a bus driver. And I asked him one day how he could stand it, driving that bus all those years knowing he had a college degree. And he said, "No one could take my education from me." He said, "I did what I needed to do to make it better for you and your sisters." And he said, it was important. And he said driving a bus was good, honest, decent work. And he wanted to make it better for us. And so when I think back, any roadblock I face, any challenge I face, I think about the sacrifices they made, and they give me the inspiration to go on.
No, your parents were incredible. And they also instilled a sense of responsibility to give back in you, I know. And so Judge Williams has just always been incredibly involved in the community. She helped found the Black Women Lawyers Association in Chicago, helped found an organization called Just the Beginning. That's a pipeline organization for underrepresented groups to become judges and lawyers, helped found an organization that helps students of color and otherwise pass the bar. And in recognition of these and many, many other activities, she's won numerous awards, including the Debit Award, which is the highest award a U.S. federal judge could receive. And one of the other ways that Judge Williams has given back for many years, since actually 2000 in her first trip to Ghana, where she helped train judges in case management there, is by doing training programs in Africa. The graphic on the left was just of Judge Williams' trainings with an organization called Lawyers Without Borders through 2018. And I think she's probably led at least 30, if not more, programs in Africa to train judges and lawyers in countries beyond that on the left, including your beloved Uganda and Zambia and Namibia. If you go to the next slide, Rhoda, too. So there's a picture of one of the trainings that we did in Kenya, and you can see Judge Williams is in the bright red suit in the middle there, and right next to her is your friend, then Chief Justice William Mutunga. And Judge Williams actually left the bench in 2018, and now she and I work full-time at the international law firm of Jones Day. And Judge Williams' sole focus there is on pro bono rule of law work in Africa. So Judge, you've devoted so much of your life and your passion and your heart to doing training programs in Africa. And why is that? Why training and why Africa?
Well, first, why training? You know, I said I was a teacher, and I think I will always be a teacher, and I'm a teacher at heart. So I began training lawyers in the U.S. Once I had tried several cases with the National Institute for Trial Advocacy a couple of years after I became a federal prosecutor. And I continued with that organization and continue to teach there. And I've taught at law schools, advocacy training. So it's a passion of mine. And why Africa? My mother liked to travel, but the one place she never got to visit was Africa. And my parents were very, very aware of history and very aware that our ancestors were from Africa. So Africa has always held a special place in my heart. My mother sadly passed a couple years ago, and she never made it to Africa, but she felt like she had been to Africa through me. And because I knew my roots were in Africa, and because I feel like I've been very blessed in my career, there have been a lot of people who've reached out their hands to help me of all colors and races. And I feel that I've really been blessed. And I feel that when you have been blessed and been able to do what I've been able to do in my life, you have an obligation to give back like my parents did, to give back to others. And when I saw the struggles that people had in Africa, knowing, of course, independence came from most countries in the 50s and 60s, the experience I had, I wanted to share because I could share the mistakes we've made in the US or that I've made in my career, and hopefully be able to give best practices and share those ideas in the continent so that the system of justice was fair, so that the people who don't have a voice get a voice, to help judges and lawyers and sometimes police officers as well in various areas. So the bottom line is, in my heart, I'm African, and my ancestry is certainly in Africa, and so that's why I keep coming back.
So we can have the next slide, Rhoda. And Judge Williams is now, like I said, at Jones Day, and these are the areas of focus in the Rule of Law initiative that she's leading at our firm. It includes increasing access to justice and expanding alternative dispute resolution. We go to the next slide now. And some of the areas that she's done training in Africa since 2000 include trial advocacy, opinion writing, ethics, wildlife and human trafficking. You can see others here. She's also done lots of training in both the US and Africa on case management. There's been backlog in both countries. And so, Judge, in the US, first of all, our focus today is on mediation and arbitration. And that's relatively common in the US now, but is it always that way? And how did lawyers and judges react to this idea of alternative dispute resolution in the US when it was first introduced?
Well, it was first introduced really in the US, I would say in the 1980s, and it was not wildly popular by any stretch. And we did have quite a backlog in our civil case system. In the 70s, a law had passed, the Speedy Trial Act, that covered the criminal cases, but nothing had been done with civil. And corporations were complaining, people were complaining that the cases weren't moving fast enough. So now presidential candidate Joe Biden, who was a senator then, the Senate passed a law, the Biden Act, and to deal with case management, to give judges more power to move cases through, to set deadlines for the cases. And one of the critical components of that Biden Act was that every district, because in the federal system, we have two court systems in the US, the federal system, which handles about 5% of the cases across the country. The judges appointed in that system are appointed by the president and confirmed by the Senate. And then every state court, our 50 states, has a court system, trial court, appellate court, and then a Supreme Court in each state. So I'm speaking of the federal courts with the Biden Act. So it was a requirement that every district have ADR, mediation or arbitration. The judges were not happy with that because some of my colleagues felt that we were there to try cases. We were not there to do settlements. Lawyers felt, well, mediation, arbitration would take money out of their pockets because they could make more money trying cases. And people just weren't used to whether it would be fair, whether it would make a difference, whether it would actually save money. So this Biden Act actually forced us to do it. And now I'm happy to report every district in the United States has some kind of ADR. The majority is mediation in the federal courts. Now routinely, when a case is filed, it is filed with a trial judge, and it's also filed with a magistrate, at least in our Northern District of Illinois. And the first thing that the parties are asked is, have you had settlement discussions? Do you think this is a case that can settle? I can send you to the magistrate, and the magistrate will mediate the case. So it's become very commonplace. The lawyers have then discovered that if they get a reputation as a lawyer who can settle cases, go to mediation and get a case settled, that is a good thing. That's something that happens in the community. The community finds out, boy, if you go to this lawyer, he will be able to, or she will be able to settle the case instead of waiting 2 or 3 years for the case to be determined or resolved by a judge. So mediation is extremely popular now in the United States. And I would dare to say that our courts could not survive if we didn't have mediation. Arbitration, not as much, because arbitration is more expensive, but mediation is important. The other thing that I would say about mediation is, who would ever think that mediation would be good at the Court of Appeals level? So someone had the idea, you know what, maybe even after the cases have been tried, even after one side has won the case and is the victor, maybe we can have some mediation at the Court of Appeals level, because appeals cost money. It costs money for appeals. So our Seventh Circuit started a pilot with one lawyer about, I would say, 15 years ago. We now have 3 full-time mediation lawyers in the Court of Appeals, and they settle between 40 and 50% of the cases that come before that are filed in the Court of Appeals. So it has an impact. And now every circuit in the United States, our 13 circuits, have a settlement office in the Court of Appeals. So it's very, very effective.
Yeah, I just find that those stats incredible. This is where one party already won, at the trial level, and yet they're willing to settle, to mediate on appeal. And so it's just been an incredibly successful program for us. So, Judge, in talking about the trainings you've done in the US and in Africa, we're talking about how much case management training you've done and how receptive the judges were to that. But when did it hit you that, gosh, even if we had the best case managers, courts still couldn't use that alone to catch up with the backlog?
So as we've discussed, I've done a lot in a lot of countries in Africa, and always the issue of case management comes up. Certainly when I'm training judges, and I've trained judges in Kenya, in Ghana, in Tanzania, and other places. How do we get our backlog down? What can we do to reduce this backlog? So we have shared a lot of techniques, and there has been progress made. And like in Kenya now, they're going to actually, I think everything is going to be electronic filing. That's going to really help. The courts are doing what they can to help move cases through the system. But a few years ago, it just hit me. It didn't matter to me if we added 300 more judges and 300 more courtrooms. There's no way the judges could get through all those cases within a reasonable period of time, because justice delayed is justice denied. And that mediation should really, I would say, come back to Africa. So let's go back to Africa and the tree. In many villages, in many communities, the elders, and it's still true, deal with disputes in the community. People come, they listen to the elders, they present their case, the elders give a recommendation or try to work out the dispute. As the European culture took hold in Africa, there was the more formalized justice system. But in my view, going back to the way disputes are resolved and continue to be resolved is really important. So from a cultural standpoint, it makes absolute sense. When you look at a place like Rwanda with the horrors of the genocide, there was no way that International Criminal Tribunal in Rwanda could handle all the cases related to the genocide. So they have the what is it, Aaron? Say the word for me. Jakaka courts. I'm off on my pronunciation. Please forgive me, but it means being under the tree. And the community elects people to resolve the disputes. People come, the Tutsis and the Hutus come together, and they resolve the matter. It could be someone working in the field in the farm of someone whose family was slain by the Hutu individual. It could be community service. It could be spending some time in jail, but they've been able to resolve a lot of disputes. I think that it would be very beneficial. And I think most African, at least the countries I'm familiar with, are recognizing this, and courts are setting up court annex mediation, where mediators are either hired by the court or the court screens the mediators, and then the parties split the cost of the mediators. Sometimes you're referred to private mediation if it can be afforded. So I think mediation is really critical, and I prefer that over arbitration. Arbitration is more like a trial because evidence is presented, witnesses are presented, you're before 1, 2, or 3 arbitrators, and they make a decision. And that can take a lot of time. I think mediation is also helpful because a lot of the judges and lawyers talk about the fact that many people that appear before the courts across the continent are unrepresented. Maybe 80 to 90% of the people are unrepresented. So they can't afford to have a lawyer. So having an opportunity to mediate when it's a fair situation, when the mediator is fair to both sides, can make a tremendous difference in the lives of the people and also in the life of the economy.
All right. If we can have the next slide. Let's see. So there are many people on this call probably know these differences between arbitration and mediation already, but I understand we may have some university students on. So just in case, here's a slide that shows some of the main differences between arbitration and mediation. One of the biggest ones here being that the arbitrator in arbitration, either the single arbitrator or it's often a panel of 3 or more, has the power to decide. Whereas in mediation, the mediation has no power to decide. It's all to the parties as to whether they reach an agreement. We also hear about court annex mediation versus voluntary mediation. Judge, could you talk a little bit about the difference between those two types of mediation?
Yeah, and then just let me make one other comment, Aaron, about the differences. So mediation, it's confidential. So the mediator, whatever you tell the mediator, each side, sometimes the mediator, initially will meet with both sides. Each side will get a chance to tell their side of the case. And then the mediator can go to one person and talk to them confidentially, go to the other and talk to them confidentially. And that confidentiality is very crucial to resolving the case. If it is court annex mediation, the mediator won't run to the judge. Let's say the case doesn't get settled. The mediator can't run to the judge and say, well, Judge, Mr. Wango, he didn't want to settle. The other side wanted to settle, but he didn't want to settle. The mediator can't run to the court and say that. That's all kept in confidence. And the mediation, in order to make sure each side sticks to their agreement, is registered in court and becomes like a court order, so that if someone tries to back out of it, the court can enforce it. On the arbitration side, you actually get a ruling. It's more like a trial. It's more like a trial, and it's more costly. Often in mediation, the parties want to continue to have a relationship. So it could be two business partners. They've worked together for years. Something came up. One of them wants to leave the business, maybe wants to retire, and they're fighting over the office equipment, but they want to maintain their relationship. Or it could be a domestic situation where it could be between brothers and sisters over land. They want to have a relationship when this ends. You have generally a better outcome in mediation than you do in arbitration when you get a ruling, because then that resentment still continues. Whereas in mediation, the mediator tries to come up with a result that is at least satisfactory to each side. Each side doesn't get 100% of what they want, but they get something they can live with.
Great. And then court annex mediation is generally that the court is ordering and requiring the parties to go to mediation. That doesn't mean the court is requiring them to reach an agreement. It's just requiring them at least to go to mediation to try. Versus
exactly. So they're given the option. The court can screen the mediators, like I said. There are some courts, I think it's in Nigeria, where the court has there's a community mediation centers that have been approved by the court. So the court can send them to a community mediation center. So if you're someone who doesn't have money or you don't have representation, you can go to those community centers and you can get your case mediated. Sometimes you can ask for the parties to engage in mediation before the lawsuit is even filed. So in some courts, there's a requirement that you try to mediate the case before you file the complaint. So there are various ways that mediation can work. It just depends on the culture, it depends on the circumstances, and what works best for that community.
You can have the next slide. You can see that Judge Williams is very passionate about mediation. As a former judge, she likes when those cases settle and get off her docket, but also likes the idea of the resolution that the parties reach agreement. And so years ago, she joined the board of the Weinstein International Foundation. It's a nonprofit that is dedicated to making mediation available and accessible worldwide in the face of global challenges and conflict. And if we go to the next slide,
And can I just, Aaron, say this on Weinstein, that there are 100 fellows across the world, and about 15 of them are from Africa. And that was really what motivated me to join Weinstein. And also, it's not just the commercial side of mediation, but it's also helping on the development of the community side, dealing with disputes that the communities have with, say, a business. Let's say, I don't know, a company wants to build a factory. It's going to provide a lot of jobs, but the community is upset about it because it affects the water stream and the cattle won't be able to get water. So to look at some of the challenges within communities, that's the other thing the Weinstein Foundation looks at, pro bono type projects, and how can we help communities across the globe.
and if we have the next slide, then one of the things the Weinstein International Foundation did was actually last year in partnership with one of the partners in this webinar series, the Strathmore Law School, and in particular, the Strathmore Dispute Resolution Center, put on an international mediation conference in Nairobi. The Chief Justice of Kenya spoke, the US Ambassador to Kenya spoke, folks were in from all over Africa. Judge, just briefly, why did you think putting on that conference was important?
Well, because I think, as I said, and I think there's a recognition, and of course, people who live on the continent and in these countries certainly know way more than I know. So let me just say that. But the sense that of seeing the growing mediation culture, we felt at Weinstein and Strathmore Mediation Center that we should bring together mediation professionals, lawyers, people in the community who were just curious, what could mediation do? How could mediation be effective? Can mediation help on the criminal side? And I absolutely believe it can, because I think a form of mediation is guilty pleas, because the prisons are backed up in all the countries I've been in, really backed up. People are waiting because they can't afford to pay bail. They're waiting because of the time it takes the prosecution to put cases together. Many people are unrepresented and sitting in jail sometimes longer than what their sentence would actually call for. So we thought that looking at it from both the civil and the criminal side would be useful. We also thought that, the world is really based on relationships. And so these exchanges and bringing people from across the continent. So I'm going to give you an example. So Gerald came from Barefoot Law. I thought it was really important for people to understand what Barefoot is doing, how Barefoot is training women to go out into the various communities, into the villages, giving them skills, mediation skills, so they can help resolve disputes. Those connections, when Barefoot Law was there, Gerald was there, and now there's a relationship between Barefoot Law and Strathmore. Building relationships and exchanging ideas is so important, and so that's why I thought that was it was very, very important.
And that conference was last year, and then the pandemic hit, and now many trials in the US and elsewhere are suspended, matters are continued, courts are backed up. More and more suits are expected, at least in the US, areas like insurance, financial services with businesses defaulting on loans, employment, hospitality and travel industry is certainly hit hard by the pandemic. And so attorneys and courts are saying, well, how can we keep the disputes out of these already overburdened judicial systems? And one answer is mediation or arbitration. Judge, how do you feel about virtual mediation or arbitration? It's what we have to do in these times in many places. And do you think it's a good solution?
Oh yeah, I think we have to do it, and it's being done now. It's being done. We have to do it. And I think even when the horror and the nightmare of this pandemic ends, I think as the scientists and the medical people are telling us, there are going to be more viruses coming down the road. So we have to just sort of look at the long picture. But I think one of the consequences and one of the silver linings in this pandemic is this whole virtual how we've shifted to this virtual world. I just look at myself. We used to use Zoom because, Aaron, we are dealing with Africa. And so we wanted to use Zoom to talk to our colleagues, but there are a lot of people in the US and businesses just couldn't imagine the virtual world we're operating in now. But we've all had to embrace it. And I think we're going to continue in this virtual world in many respects. And I think mediation is going to continue. And in fact, several of my friends that are full-time mediators, they're mediating. They were mediating once they got the equipment and they understood how Zoom worked or WebEx worked or all these other platforms work. And the fact that you can go into separate rooms so you can meet the parties separately, they are conducting mediations. That's just the way of the world. So I think that the virtual world can really work. I think you can use a lot of the techniques that you use for live mediation. People are getting used to it. And so I think it's critical. I think it's critical.
We've heard talk about empathy both from Gerald and Dr. Matunga addressed that, or sorry, yes, former Chief Justice Matunga addressed that in his remarks. Do you think there's a need for physical proximity to generate that empathy or that human connection? In mediation, a lot of it is about bringing the parties together and trying to reach an agreement. Do you think that's possible in the virtual world?
I do. Obviously, well, I shouldn't say obviously, but to me, being live is better. If you can be live, if you can have that person in front of you, if they can see the eyes of the mediator, if they can feel the fairness that the mediator brings to the situation, if a level of trust is built, I think it's easier to do that live. So I'm still a big proponent of live mediation, and I know we'll return to doing live mediation, some live mediation. But I also think that surprisingly, emotion and trust can take place in this virtual world. And I've seen it work. The greatest fear is, that it won't be real, that somehow people will be able to, I don't know, fake it but that's not been my experience. And certainly, as I said, my friends, I haven't done any mediations in the virtual world, but they do it all the time. And they are able to establish a level of trust. Of course, a good mediator explains what the mediation is about, explains what the procedures are, creates a dialogue between the parties, the individuals coming to the mediation, asking them what it is their problem is, and for them to explain it. The other side gets to explain what their problem is. They each get to say what they want as an outcome. So like in that example with the company and the water, the people in the village would be saying, look, we need to water our cow. We need our cows. They need water. We need our farms. It needs water. So we need some way to make sure we get water. The business people say, well, we're bringing so many jobs and we know that your community wants jobs. What can we do? So they sit down and try to come up with a solution. Maybe it's the way the water is routed. Maybe it's the piping that's done. Maybe the factory gets moved to a slightly different location so that the water is there. I mean, and I think that can be done in the virtual world. Now, the problem is whether people have the technology. So, this Zoom and all of that actually works on cell phones. It works on iPads. It obviously works on laptops and computers, but we know there's a gap too, that everybody doesn't have a laptop or a iPad, but most people do have cell phones. Then the issue is connectivity. What about broadband? So for example, we were supposed to do a training in Ethiopia. There were 200 brand new public defenders that were being trained, and we were going to train. I was going to take a big team. We were going to train 100 in April and then 100 later in the year. Well, Ethiopia has terrible problems with their broadband and with connectivity. So the virtual world is not an option if you don't have good connectivity. So that's where I see the problem. Connectivity and the people having access to the devices. So
Yeah, no, yeah, we just on that access, if you show the next slide, Rhoda, it's about Barefoot Law. And of course, all of you watching know about the incredible work that Barefoot Law does in bringing access to justice in this virtual world that's even more common these days. We're just in awe of all that you do, Gerald and Rhoda and others at Barefoot. Online mediation, you can use cell phones in many cases, but yes, certainly, as Judge Williams said, one concern is that some people may still not have the right technology. If we go to the next slide now, I'll talk about preparing clients for mediation for the attorneys in the audience during these times of COVID. Do you think the preparation for mediation is much different online versus in person?
No, I think the preparation is key. And I think just in terms of a culture and thinking about a community, education is key. So this concept of mediation, people have to understand how it works, and they have to trust it, and they have to feel like it won't be corrupt. In terms of the mediator, if it is coming from the court, and if people have been qualified and these mediators have been well trained, and the mediators are fair, if it's court annex mediation, the confidence of the people will build. And it's just like anything else. It starts a little slow, but as more cases get mediated and people are happy with the results, they talk to their friends talk to other people. The court can put on a campaign about mediation to explain what mediation does. So that's helpful. But I think you have to have a campaign in the country for people to understand that mediation is different, that it's not going through the court system. So that's really important, having highly qualified mediators who are fair, who can be trusted. That's number one. Number two, when you're getting a client ready for mediation, they have to understand what mediation is. They have to understand that it is confidential, like I mentioned, that it saves money, that we're looking for a result, that the person is not going to get 100% of what they want, that they can try to go to trial and get 100%, but the lawyer can talk to them about their rate of success. And many people who are unrepresented don't have great success when they're going against parties that have lawyers. So the person, so if you've got a lawyer, your lawyer can explain all that about mediation, the advantages. But what about you're somebody who doesn't have a lawyer? Well, then that is an education function, a function of the court. So the court should have brochures, or the court should have something online that explains what mediation is. It needs to be in different languages, using some of the techniques of Barefoot Law, like their phone in, I know I'm using the wrong term, Gerald, but where people can call in because they have a legal issue and it's in 4 different languages, and they can hear like a message over the phone about some of the things they need to do. Well, there's no reason you can't have that kind of mediation hotline that explains the basics of mediation. So when a person comes to mediation, they understand what's going on. Then, of course, it's the job of the mediator to explain to someone who's unrepresented what mediation is, what the role of the mediator is, and how they're trying to come up with something that both sides can live with in the mediation. So the idea is to look forward in mediation to try to come up with a solution.
In the few minutes we have left, I just wanted to talk briefly about some of the work that you're doing in mediation, even during these times of COVID, doing work around the world. Leonardo D'Urso heads the ADR Center, which is the largest ADR center in Europe. And with him, you've been training mediators in Jamaica virtually. I wonder if you talk about the biggest highlight or the biggest takeaway from that training that you've been doing?
Well, it was supposed to take place in Jamaica, but it involves mediators from all over the Caribbean. And we're training them to be trainers. So we're training them to train mediators. And I didn't get to say, Aaron, in the training that we do in Africa, that is one of the keys that we do in every country we go to after we've been there a couple years and we've done the training. Then there are lawyers who express, or judges, that, hey, I would like to be a trainer. I'd like to learn how to train. So we always have training of training programs, because my view is we should be out of a job. It should be Nigerians training Nigerians, Ugandans training Ugandans. We're coming in, we're giving the skills, but we want those skills to be transferred because we want things to go on for forever. The kind of work that I do is systemic. It's not a fly-in a helicopter doing one talk and then we're out of there. Because people get, to me, fatigue. You get tired of people coming in saying, we'll do one thing. You spend all that time trying to get them educated and you never see them again. There are some projects that are one-off type projects, but those are not the kind of projects that we get involved in. We get involved in long-term. So this training of trainers in Jamaica, it was all done virtually, all virtual. So we use slide sharing. We use polling where questions were asked and people could vote. We used the small breakout rooms. We did role play where one person would serve as the mediator. One person would serve as the, there'd be the two parties. And then the other being trained in the room would observe what the mediator said, how the mediator developed the rapport, and it would end, and then they would give comments on how the mediator did in conducting it. So it convinced me that this kind of training can be done virtually, and also that mediation can be done virtually. And in fact, our law firm, Jones Day, with Mike Ginsberg, who started coming to Kenya with me many, many years ago, is getting ready to do a training at Jones Day virtually on mediation. So it's being done. So that's my big takeaway. It can be done. Now you have to work with time zones when you're dealing internationally, but it works.
And if you do the next slide here, the Edwards Mediation Academy is another leading mediation institute. Bruce Edwards, the head, is just an incredible mediator, mediated over 3,000 cases. He's also, like Leonardo, on the board of the Weinstein International Foundation. And speaking of, it can be done, Judge Williams and I are also working with Bruce Edwards to do training of judges and attorneys and professors who are going to be leading mediation in Zambia. They already have some mediation, but leading it even on an even more advanced level. And it's interesting, this pandemic has actually afforded people the opportunity to do this. Before the pandemic, we might have thought, oh, we need to go do this in person. But now, with virtual being the only option, they've been taking an online mediation course that you can see here through the Edwards Mediation Academy, and then we have periodic Zoom meetings to conduct the training. And I think it's just been incredible and something that might not have happened, but for the pandemic.
No, I agree. And the thing we're getting ready to do now, because we took the group that are going to be the key first trainers, 6 of them, they went through this online training, like Aaron said, and we were supposed to be going to Zambia. We were going to train 50 people to be mediators. We were going to have our training team from Zambia. They were going to be part of the course this first time. And then we were going back in the fall, we were going to train another 50 mediators, because in Zambia, they have a chief justice who's very enthusiastic about mediation. They were doing mediation at the high court level. They've now extended it to the magistrates court, but they don't have enough mediators. They don't have enough well-trained mediators in order to do mediation. So what we're now going to do is we're going to do virtual training of mediators. That's the next thing. So we can't do 50 live, but we're going to see if we can do 50 virtually using the breakout rooms. So again, like she said, Leonardo and Bruce are my colleagues at the Weinstein Foundation.
Yeah, and then if you could do the next slide. Judge Williams, I know you watched a program recently on the World Bank's use of mediation. And just very briefly, why did you find it so interesting? Just
Well,
one takeaway from there.
because the World Bank, does so much good work around the world, but some of their donees, those people that they give the money to, end up in disputes with the local population, or and so it can take quite some time to resolve things. So when you look at this, how this group works, the CAO. So if you look at the top of the branch, there's an assessment. It goes to dispute resolution. It gets mediated. It gets monitored to make sure that that the agreement between the parties is being followed, and then the case is closed. We heard Gina, who runs this division, and she says 70% of the disputes that come before the World Bank end up being resolved by this mediation. The bottom branch is when it's not resolved. Okay, so here's an example. So the bottom branch, the 30%, that's when it's a long investigation. It's a very different process, but the mediation, 70% of the time it works. And what she does is she has mediators that are in the country. So if she's got an issue in Mongolia, then she's got mediators that have been trained through her organization, and they go in and work. So it's not like the World Bank people who sit in DC go and try to resolve things in Mongolia. They send somebody in who's familiar with it. And here are a couple projects. So this in Mongolia project that impacted the water supply for the herders. So there's the organization, the herders, and the government, and they agreed on a process to monitor things. In Nicaragua, there was chronic kidney disease, and it had to do with the sugar estates and the water and all that kind of thing. So if you look on the right, you can see they've made changes to the practice. They're doing microfinancing and other things. In Egypt, unpaid wages and a contract termination, there was an agreement reached in 5 months. So I just wanted to show this to say, even like the World Bank, with the big projects they have, recognize how important it is to have mediation and to have people on the ground involved in the mediation.
Great. Then the last question that I have for you, as our time is running short, is, well, certainly we're all hopeful that the vaccine will come sooner rather than later. And this crisis will pass. We all must believe that. And after it does pass, do you think virtual mediation and arbitration are here to stay? And what do you see as the future for mediation and arbitration?
I absolutely think it is here to stay. I absolutely think it is here to stay. I think it's very cost effective, because part of the problem too is people traveling to the courthouse. I mean, part of what mediation is, where do you have the mediation? So in order to help all the people that need help, you have to have the mediators go where the problem is, or you have to have those who have the problem come to the mediator. And sometimes people can't afford that. It's not realistic. So you have to go where you need to be. And the virtual world allows us to do that and to cut expenses and for people to be heard. And this is an example. I wanted to end with this because I said under the tree, to me, is so much of what represents African culture. And this was a dispute in Uganda. And one of the community representatives that was a representative in the mediation, again with the World Bank, there was a proposal. And so they gathered everybody in the village so that everybody could hear what that proposal was, to discuss what was going on in the negotiation, to get everybody's views so that the matter could be resolved. And so I think that's the future, under the tree, live when you can, but virtual will be critical to moving things forward.
Oh, well, thank you very much, Judge Williams. You can see why I've had the incredible honor of working with her for so long. And thank you to Barefoot and Strathmore for giving both of us the honor and pleasure of being with you and with all of your guests today. And thank you also for bearing with me. I thought my internet was kicking me out briefly there, and so I have a new background now. I'm closer to my internet connection up in my office, but I'm glad I was able to stay with all of you today. So with that, I'd like to turn it back over to Rhoda with just a sincere asante sana to all of you.
My mic was muted. Thank you so much, Erin, and thank you very, very much, Judge Williams, for taking the time and taking us through this. I love your metaphor and your emphasis on under the tree and the importance of community and having any approach to mediation be with that mindset and with that, because we're time bound, I would actually like to ask Emma Wabuke. I'm glad you're able to join us. I would kindly request that you kind of close us off and also give the attendees a bit of a brief about Strathmore University and our collaboration together and essentially just end the webinar for us. So I'm glad you're able to join us. Karibu sana.
Thank you very much, Rhoda, and thank you as well for inviting me to participate in this webinar series. My name is Emma. I am actually standing in for Bala Galma, who is the current manager of the Strathmore Dispute Resolution Center. Judge Anne-Claire Williams has actually discussed about the center and the collaboration between Weinstein Foundation, Barefoot Legal, and the Dispute Resolution Center at Strathmore, which deals with or organizes trainings around mediation and other alternative dispute resolution forums here in Kenya. Personally, I have interacted with Judge Anne-Claire Williams in one particular, in my task, or rather in my duties as the faculty director of the Strathmore Law Clinic. And Judge Anne-Claire Williams was actually instrumental in helping us attain some funding in which we were able to complete a training for community paralegals who live in Kibera slum in Kenya, and were able to train these young community leaders to be community paralegals, and they have continued the work. It's been 1 year since we completed the program, and they have actually continued the work in giving legal awareness sessions to the rest of the community members. And that is one way in which I have personally interacted with Judge Anne-Claire Williams, and one in which I'm particularly very grateful for. I just want to thank Judge Anne-Claire Williams and Erin for this informative discussion that we've had about the role of mediation, even in this new normal that we are now encountering with the COVID-19 pandemic, and the role that mediation can play in ensuring that disputes are resolved quickly and in an efficacious manner. So thank you very much for that informative discussion. We at Strathmore Law School we are very grateful for the collaboration that we started with Barefoot Law in Uganda. The collaboration is really widespread and includes not only this webinar series. In fact, today is the second installment of the webinar series, the first being a couple of weeks ago where we hosted the former Chief Justice here in Nairobi. That's Chief Justice Willie Mutunga. And so with Barefoot Law, Strathmore Law School collaborates with Barefoot Law in various forums, and including informative discussions like here at like this discussion that we've just had. We also collaborate with our work at the Law Clinic and Barefoot Law's incredible work in Uganda. We're trying to find ways in which we can really integrate both these core sort of duties that we have in providing access to justice for communities across the region. And we're trying to find ways in which we can really continue our collaboration beyond Uganda into Kenya and even beyond the region. So we are extremely grateful for the collaboration that we have struck with Barefoot Law, and we are hoping that it will continue, and we will continue actually developing more projects that really help to foster access to justice. I'm very happy, and I wish to join Bala, who asked me to stand in for her. I'm very happy to participate in this session. I am extremely happy to hear. I have to say, Judge Claire Williams has the best stories, and it's quite incredible to see the work that she does, and just to as really a child of Africa in a manner of speaking, and to really see the inspiration that comes from her personal life and how she has been able to translate her own personal inspirations into her lifelong career work. It's incredible. It's a lesson in itself in which how we can tap into our own personal lives and personal experiences, both informed by our families, and in this case, Judge Claire Williams' father, how we can tap into these experiences and help chart a career which is reflective of our experiences. So I know we are pressed for time, and I will wish to stop there. Thank you very much again for including me into this conversation. Thank you very much, Judge Claire Williams, for the discussion, and Erin as well, and Barefoot Law. And again, I apologize for the internet connectivity issues. When you discussed that, Judge Claire Williams, about the internet issues in Ethiopia, I in some way really understood that, even though I'm just in Nairobi. So thank you very much in that regard. And back to you, Rhoda.
Okay, thank you so much, Emma. And with that, I will close our webinar today with very, very many heartfelt thanks to Judge Williams for giving us the time, Erin for helping lead the discussion, Barefoot Law and Strathmore for making this happen, and to everyone that took the time to join in, to listen into our discussion. Thank you, thank you, thank you, and I wish you a great rest of your day. So thank you very much, everyone.